With well over 1,000 different species of Pokemon, it should come as no real surprise that some are just a bit more forgotten about than others. Now, a Pokemon can be forgotten for many reasons. Maybe it's not all that great in battle, or maybe it's just a one-off mon with no evolutionary line. And so today, I'm gonna try to bring some much needed attention to these mons by telling you who the most forgotten Pokemon from every region is. Let's not waste any time and get right into the video. The Kanto region was most definitely the toughest to select here for this entire video. And that's mostly because these are the iconic original 151 Pokemon. However, of all of the Kanto Pokemon, I ultimately decided to go with Dewgong. Now, Dewgong has never been a very good Pokemon in pretty much every aspect. Its design is honestly pretty uninteresting, and then when it comes to battling, it has remained one of the most underwhelming Pokemon of all time. If we just look at the Kanto games alone, Dewgong is literally the third best ice water type in those games, and its stats are just really bad. And in the entirety of all the games ever, there has only ever been one notable trainer to use a Dewgong, and that of course is Lorelei of the Kanto Elite Four, who uses a Dewgong as her lead-off Pokemon. Meanwhile, Dewgong has also never had any real major role in the anime series or in any spin-offs. I mean, Go did capture one in Pokemon Journeys, and it had a few nice moments, but I'm sure you don't even remember that thing, right? And what just might be the worst of all for Dewgong is that it's one of the few Kanto Pokemon over the years that has never received any special treatment. And by this, I mean in 9 whole generations, Dewgong has received no Mega, Gigantamax, Z-Move, Regional Form, New Evolution, or whatever else it could be. Yep, Dewgong has gotten nothing. When looking through the Johto native Pokemon, we quickly noticed that this Johto dex has actually aged quite well. Almost every Pokemon here has either received an evolution, alternate form, or at least had a major role in the anime. However, I did have to go with Bellossom here as the most forgotten Johto Pokemon. So the first thing that is really working against poor Bellossom is that it is most certainly the worser of the Gloom branched evolutions. To me, Bellossom always kinda just felt unnecessary. I think we can all agree that Vileplume outclasses it in just about every way possible. And since the introduction of the fairy typing, Vileplume's poison typing gives it another major advantage over Bellossom. I honestly don't think Bellossom's design is really all that bad though. Actually, I think it's quite good on its own. But like I stated earlier, it isn't that much of a natural looking progression from Oddish and then Gloom. So in that vein, it kind of doesn't work all that well. I mean, if you're new to the Pokemon franchise and just scrolling through the national dex, you might just think that Bellossom is a standalone grass type from Johto. And for the life of me, I could not think of one legitimate NPC of importance in all of Pokemon history that uses a Bellossom. And so I had to do some serious digging to find that the only notable trainer that uses a Bellossom is Gym Leader Erica, but only in the Johto games. And ironically, Bellossom is also her ace. But it should also come as no real surprise that Bellossom has always been very bad in battle. Luckily though for Bellossom, it has survived both generations of Dexit, and it is accessible in both Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet. However, even that small victory is not enough to keep Bellossom from being Johto's most forgotten Pokemon. The Hoenn region is my favorite in the entire franchise, so I'm familiar with just about every Pokemon introduced here in Gen 3. I was considering mons like Swalot or Chimecho, but after a lot of thinking, I finally decided that Relicanth was the most forgotten mon from Hoenn. I mean, in the past 2 generations, Relicanth was only available in the DLC of Sword and Shield, and right now, it's unobtainable in Scarlet and Violet. And believe me when I tell you, no one has been asking for it to come back either. Now, I don't want to come across as too overly negative here, because Relicanth is actually kind of cool, and it even boasts a pretty interesting design. There is, however, a lot working against Relicanth that is more than likely costing it some major popularity in the eyes of fans. First, in just about every single game Relicanth appears in, it's actually pretty hard to find, and oftentimes it's just found in a single route or two. And also, these encounters are often very late in the game, and for a normal playthrough, you more than likely will already have your water type for the team. But beyond just being somewhat hard to find, Relicanth isn't good at all in battle. It has a ton of weaknesses thanks to its typing, and I mean, just look at these stats. Its speed stat is abysmal, and there really isn't much of a reason to ever use one in any battle ever. Relicanth is also the first entry in this video that is a standalone single-stage Pokemon, and based on numbers alone, that already puts Relicanth at a major disadvantage. In all honesty, there is no reason to ever actually use or even capture a Relicanth. I mean, the only reason you should ever get one is when you have to put one at the end of your party to capture the Regis in the Hoenn games. That very niche instance is the only real relevance that Relicanth can regularly rely on. Other than that, Relicanth certainly falls flat in just about every instance ever, and it is most likely the worst water-type Pokemon in the region with too much water. The Sinnoh region introduced a lot of awesome Pokemon, and I'll be honest with you, most of them are incredibly memorable. Well, except for Lumineon, who is the most forgotten Pokemon from Sinnoh. Now, something interesting about Lumineon is that it is so forgettable, it's actually kind of memorable. What I mean by this is that many Pokefans know Lumineon strictly as the forgotten Pokemon. In pretty much every Sinnoh game, both Finneon and Lumineon are very hard to find. I mean, even the NPCs in the Sinnoh games don't want to use these things either. And just like Relicanth, Lumineon is obviously a water type, which is the most abundant type in all of Pokemon. It's just a very underwhelming water type that probably won't make it onto many Sinnoh teams. I mean, just take a look at Lumineon's stats. You think this thing is gonna help you with Volkner, Team Plasma, or Cynthia? Yeah, no way. However, Lumineon kind of got an important role in the DP anime, I guess? It was one of Zoe's main Pokemon she would use for contests, but it only appeared in one episode as a fully evolved Lumineon. I really don't know what else to say about this Pokemon. It's really just a boring fish who lacks any redeemable qualities. The Unova region was sort of a soft reboot for the franchise, and it also introduced the most Pokemon ever to a new generation. However, the selection here was kind of easy, and that's because Maractus is easily the most forgotten Pokemon ever. First, Maractus is another single-stage Pokemon who is found relatively late into its games, and it's also not ever really a Pokemon you would consider actually using. Like pretty much every other Pokemon on this list today, Maractus is bad in battle. However, Maractus might actually be the worst Pokemon on this entire list with respect to battling prowess. And it's also a mono grass type, which on its own is obviously not good. If you take a look through the Unova Pokedex, Maractus is probably the 10th best grass type from the region, and there's only 10 grass types in Unova. Then if we take a look at Maractus's design, it's pretty uninspired and downright boring. And finally, Maractus has received very little screen time in the anime. Its only major appearance was a short dance sequence during the Black and White series, but a lot of people skip that series anyway, which doesn't help poor Maractus. To put it quite bluntly, you could remove Maractus from Pokemon history and no one would be upset about it either. The Kalos region introduced a measly 72 Pokemon, but honestly, they were all pretty solid in one way or another. But I think the most forgettable Pokemon from Kalos is actually Furfrou. Now let me begin this entry by saying Furfrou is probably the most memorable of all these forgotten Pokemon. It's just I had to make a selection here, and Furfrou is what I decided to ultimately go with. I actually like Furfrou a lot, and its whole different forms and styles gimmick is actually quite awesome, and it really fits well here in Kalos. But what's worst of all for Furfrou is that we have not been able to use one since Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So that means we really haven't been able to use a Furfrou in 7 flippin' years. It's actually the only Pokemon from Kalos that does not appear on the Nintendo Switch at all. And I mean, let's be honest, has anyone been calling for us to bring the Poodle Pokemon back? I don't know as to why Furfrou hasn't been available since Gen 7, but I assume it's a result of Game Freak being lazy. Yeah, imagine that. They likely don't want to create new renders for all of Furfrou's different forms. I can only remember one real relevant moment Furfrou had in the anime, and that occurred right before the Kalos League, where one squared off with Ash's Pikachu and lost. But then Ash gave a really awesome speech about his goals for the tournament. But yeah, other than that, nothing. Furfrou is a cool Pokemon, but it seems like Game Freak kinda gave up on it. The Alola region introduced some of the craziest mons we have ever seen, and it's the craziness of these Pokemon that actually make them quite memorable. However, the most forgotten Pokemon from the tropical Alola region is Dhelmise. Now originally, before I wrote this video, I figured I would pick either Bruxish or Komala here, but those Pokemon are actually very unique, and they even have nichely beneficial abilities while in battle. But Dhelmise has absolutely no redeemable qualities. It has the unique ability Steelworker, which gives same type attack bonus to steel type moves. But like, it would be much more beneficial to Dhelmise to just swap out the grass typing for the steel typing. Unsurprisingly, Dhelmise does not see a lot of play in either competitive or in-game. And in the base Sun and Moon games, it's another one of those late game Pokemon who doesn't evolve and can only be found in one niche location. I really think Dhelmise would have been much more loved, as well as used, and then by extension remembered more, if it received an evolution. Check out this awesome Fakemon evolution made by Dark Sylvania on Tumblr. Now, if this thing was actually real, I probably would have used it in an Alola game. It also doesn't help that Dhelmise has only ever appeared in one single episode of the Pokemon anime. And of course, it was a very underwhelming appearance, and it actually lost in battle to Lana's Poplio. To conclude this Dhelmise entry, I do believe that Dhelmise had some real potential and could have been an overall great Pokemon, but it just lacks that wow factor to make us fans remember it. Now, I am a huge hater of the Sword and Shield games, but even I have to admit that Pokemon did an amazing job bringing the Galarmons into the spotlight, either through the base games or through the Pokemon Journeys anime. So this was another selection that I had a ton of trouble with, but after a lot of thought, I ultimately decided to go with Stonejourner. First, let's talk about its design, and Stonejourner's is pretty weak. It's incredibly unoriginal and boring, yet I still somehow find it to be kind of cute. It's worth noting that Stonejourner is a Pokemon Shield exclusive mon, and while normally version exclusives aren't that big of a deal, I just feel like it's another thing working against Stonejourner here. And of course, within the Shield games, Stonejourner is also pretty tough to find. In the anime, Stonejourner had one very small and very poor showing. It was found in the Team Rocket Gacha machine, and Jessie commanded one for a very short battle where it lost to Go's Cinderace. I also do believe that Stonejourner should have received a Gigantamax form. I think they could have gotten really creative with it, and it probably wouldn't have been too tough. Just make Big Rock even bigger rock. Finally, we have Paldea with the most recent mainline Pokemon games, Scarlet and Violet. This decision here for the Gen 9 entry was honestly pretty easy, and I ultimately decided on Robska as the most forgotten Paldean Pokemon. I'll be brutally honest here. I did not even know Robska was a Pokemon. Like, seriously. The Scarlet and Violet games introduced a ton of underwhelming bugs, and Robska is certainly the worst of them all. And of course, it has a very annoying evolution method where you have to walk 1,000 steps using the Let's Go mechanic. Then after it evolves, Robska is still bad. Like, from strictly a design standpoint, what is it? Seriously, for the life of me, I could not tell you what this Pokemon is or what concept they're going for. Then when we look at battling prowess, it is awful. Just awful. Knowing that, it should come as no surprise that Robska is currently in the ZU Smogon tier, which stands for Zero Used, which I didn't even know was an actual tier, but I find it to be quite fitting for Robska. The only single redeemable factor about Robska is that it gets access to the amazing move Revival Blessing. But other than that, it is a useless Pokemon. And overall, Robska is an ugly, dumb, and worthless Pokemon that shouldn't even exist. Well guys, that's who I believe is the most forgettable Pokemon from each region. Now I'm sure you don't fully agree with my picks here, so be sure to let me know what changes you would make in the comment section below. Also, please drop a like on this video if you stayed to the very end. Thanks guys, love ya.